I'm thinking through conversations I've had with girlfriends and sisters and cousins and all the people and the different ways that their men respond to them. And it's so common for women to experience that their husband's not even willing to do the work to put her in a good space. He just wants to make the demand and her just satisfy a demand. And so what does a woman do with that? Like, that's frustrating, right? But it's like, you can't make him do the work. What does she do with that?
That is a marriage issue and not a sex issue.
Good point. I love that. You just said that. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, because it's an unwillingness for him to cultivate real intimacy and connection.
And if it is a physical act only, then you are creating disconnect. Yeah. And it turns, if that is the pattern, physical acts only, then you're doomed. You are selling your soul. Even if you're married, even if you're Christian, that is not the way that God designed sexual intimacy.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this. Hey, coffee lovers. Okay, I've got to share this with you. You know I love my coffee. I mean, hey, named my show after it, but if you're like me, multiple cups can kind of mess with your system, mess with your sleep, and spike your stress levels. Nobody wants that, especially when you love coffee. But guess what? I've recently found a solution that not only reduces your need for multiple cups of coffee, it also sharpens your mental function, lengthens the amount of energy that you have and focus while nourishing your brain. It is called Magic Mind, aptly named. So skip the endless cups of coffee. You can grab this little shot every morning. It's like a little 2-ounce drink that you just kind of shoot it down on its own, or you can enjoy it alongside of your morning coffee. It helps your body absorb the caffeine gradually, keeping you energized for hours longer. It's perfect for those who cannot handle regular coffee's impact on your heart health and your stress because, you know, coffee does raise your cortisol just a little bit. In fact, that's part of how it was developed. The founder crafted it after discovering he had developed a severe heart condition from drinking 6 to 7 cups of coffee a day just to keep himself functioning. This little shot that he created is backed by a decade of his research with health experts to not only help reduce the negative effects of coffee and caffeine in your system, but it also provides a nourishing and healing alternative. It's for high performers, moms, entrepreneurs, anybody who wants to nourish and not harm their bodies. What I love about Magic Mind is that it reduces the need for extra caffeine and it boosts your metabolism thanks to the L-theanine in matcha, which is in the product. It boosts your focus with different lion's mane and mushrooms nootropics, which also lower inflammation in your body. It also helps me maintain energy for my loaded schedule due to the slow release design of the green tea caffeine that's in this. It also, fourth benefit, enhances my chill factor with adaptogens, which causes me to leave all the stress behind. In fact, I didn't realize how effective this was until I was drinking Magic Mind every day while my husband was going through the loss of his job, and I was super chill the whole time. So it is very effective. Also, a benefit that I noticed that they didn't advertise, but I noticed, is that it actually made the cramping in my period less severe. So ladies, that is a super benefit. This drink is a game changer. So you can experience the benefits. They gave me a special link for my listeners. You can find it at magicmind.com/JavaWithJenTrial. That's magicmind.com/JavaWithJenTrial. And you can get a free 3-pack to try it out. You're just going to want to use that link and then use the code JavaWithJenTrial for the discount. You can find all of this in my show notes. So if you can't remember it, just drop to the show notes. Don't miss out on this healthier alternative to coffee that increases your productivity, protects your health, and your stress levels. I'm totally hooked. I love this stuff. So keep in mind, you'll see increased benefits with this drink the longer that you use it because it's infusing itself and rebuilding your body on a cellular level. And so with each use, it becomes more and more effective. It's a gradual crescendo of effectiveness. So if you want to check it out and get your free trial, head over to their website, magicmind.com/JavaWithJenTrial. That's magicmind.com/Java with Jen trial and use code Java with Jen trial for that free 3-pack. Okay, I know I took a moment on that, but it is worth sharing. So you guys go check that out and let's get back to the episode.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode at Java with Jen. I am really pumped because the guest I have today, Miss Mary Whitman Ortiz, is actually an expert and a coach in the area of marriage and intimacy, sexual intimacy in a marriage. And so this is not a topic we've dove into on the episodes before. We have talked about months and months, maybe years ago, how to talk to your kids about sex. That's an older episode, but we're going to touch that lightly in this one. But this is a topic that affects everybody. We all have a sexuality that we have to manage, and managing it inside of marriage is beautiful. Sometimes it feels like a craft, and sometimes it feels like a maze. And so we're going to dive into this topic because this matters to the Lord. This was his idea. Sex in marriage was God's idea. And I just want to, for anyone that this is a sensitive topic, I want you to lean in with open ears and open heart, and just know we're going to handle you carefully. And we're going to talk about this from a perspective of shamelessness, of, there is no shame around sex when it's the way God designed it, but we realize that there is a lot of shame around this topic for people because of our different broken experiences. And so our desire is to bring truth and to highlight God's heart. And so I think this is going to be a great conversation. Mary, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Hey, it is great to be here. And I'm so glad that you want to bring this truth to your listeners. And I agree with you. For everything that God wants to say, that fresh revelation, that encouragement, and some joy in this topic, because, hey, it's God's design and it's all good. So that's our source of joy.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And I love your perspective on that, especially coming from the story that you have, which I would love to invite you to dive into your story and what put this topic on your radar. I know that intimacy coaches and therapists is a thing. I have not met many of them in my lifetime, but it's very refreshing to have a Christian voice on this topic. Right. And so what put this on your radar? Because I think you'll agree, the church has not always responded to this topic healthfully. Yes. And that's a shame because it's God's idea. So what put this on your radar?
Well, there's that expression that God brings a message out of your mess. And I can certainly say that I had a mess in my life in a big way, going way back years ago. I had Christian growing and had Christian expectations for a Christian marriage, but that was still pretty vague. So once I entered into marriage, realized that the expectations that I had were different than what my husband had. And we didn't know how to talk about it. We didn't know how to go into conflict, and things became really cloudy around sex. And I wasn't sure why we were struggling so much. So it was years into the marriage until it was exposed that he had a problem with porn. And I had confronted him at one point, and he said he was doing something about it, but there was no clear plan. And this was just before there were a lot of active groups supporting. There weren't the resources. And if there weren't resources in the world, there were even less resources in the church. So it went on for years, and I won't say I was an ostrich, but I just did not know how to handle it. And there were a small group of women at our church, the wives of the men who were struggling, and we would meet, but we just had no leaders. So it was a really, really difficult thing. And I ended up almost having two lives. Who I was at home, where things were very suppressed, and I didn't feel valued, cherished, appreciated because of expectations during sex. And then who I was in my community and in my church life, because we were actually leaders in our church. We actually led couples classes, and I was hoping for more, hoping for God's design, but I just could not communicate that well. So we ended up divorcing, which was not planned, but God was still with me. And I began to get deeper healing and deeper truth and deeper understanding. And Whew, it made such a difference. The more the layers of shame and hurt and confusion, the more those layers were broken, or they came off of me, then I was lighter and freer, and people were attracted. Other women were attracted to talk to me about it. I became a safe place for others. Because when I was healed and free, I didn't mind talking about it. I wasn't covering it up. And as I would meet with these women, just friends to begin with, I realized I was not alone. So many women were struggling, and we began to encourage each other. And then I just pressed into God and felt like He was leading me to get more qualified in this area. So I went back to school and got my master's degree, and then all kinds of certifications in marriage coaching, and then in Christian sex education, which it took me a while to find a program that actually taught sexual intimacy from a Christian point of view. But that was my motivation to get into this, because God had brought healing. And even through my healing, I remarried. And now I'm in a wonderful marriage. My husband loves me. We have clear understanding, and we grow around the idea of sex and intimacy. We're not perfect by any means, but we understand each other, and we towards it, and we both have that similar goal for a beautiful connection, spirit, soul, and body in our marriage.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you said so much, and there's so many different directions I can go right now. But I'm, if I can say this without it sounding patronizing, but I say it also for anyone listening, is that I'm really proud of you for leaning into the healing, just letting the pain of your situation leave you jaded. Although I'm sure maybe you walked through that for a while, but leaving you jaded, leaving you wounded, leaving you with a bad taste in your mouth towards this, because there's no way to get around it. Everybody has a sexuality to manage. Everybody, and sexuality is meant to be a part of a healthy marriage relationship. And I'm proud of you. And for anyone listening that has been on the fence, like you just want to throw in the towel, it's exhausting to try to pursue healing. It is worth it to pursue healing. So with all that said, even as you were talking about your husband's struggle with porn, and I want to be careful. I feel like a lot of times in the church, when porn is brought up, and this is not towards you, I'm just thinking about times that I've heard this in the pulpit, it is brought up in such a demonizing way to the people that deal with it. And same with adultery, same with all of those things. But all that does is pile on the shame that they're already carrying, because they know it's not right. When you're in sin, you feel it, you're not right, And so I want to be careful that in this, that I don't take a tone, or that our conversation doesn't ever take a tone of demonizing that, because I know people that have worked carefully through the traps and addiction of pornography and have found freedom. Absolutely. And then I know some that weren't willing to work through it, and they just stayed in their addiction, and it destroyed their marriage. And as a mom of 4 boys, I care about this topic because I realize it. I feel like this mama hen always trying to like cover my children, because it feels like no matter which direction we look, there are naked women trying to get my boys' attention, and I'm like, boys, turn your head, turn that off. Don't be on your screens at night, like all these different things, try to guard their eyes. And it's because their sexuality is powerful and it's precious. And so for anybody who's listening, I do have some men that listen and some women, that listen, that maybe have struggled with porn. I want you to hear that we have hearts of grace and love and compassion towards that struggle, and not judgment, because judgment solves no problems. It just doesn't, And so I want to just give you guys the freedom to break off shame and step away from the shame and realize you don't need to waste your energy on shame. You just need to move towards healing. And so in your experience with your husband dealing with that, it sounds like obviously that the freedom that you would have hoped he would have found wasn't found. What do you feel like was one of the things that just kept him in that trap? Like, why do you feel like he couldn't get free? Or maybe people in general. Maybe we won't make this about your ex-husband, but you've worked with enough couples now that you've probably seen quite a diversity of how it affects people. What are you seeing, and what are some keys around finding the freedom from that?
Right. And this isn't even porn specific, but when we have a problem, it's easier to not face it. It's easier to say it's not that bad. It'll go away. It's not really hurting anybody else. It's okay if it hurts me, but they're in denial.
Yeah.
They suppress it, and they don't realize what they're missing out on. They're missing out on the joy, freedom.
Yeah.
When you get used to living under shame, that weight is a part of everyday life. So they don't know that they are damaging relationships by choosing something that's harmful to themselves and inevitably is harmful to their relationship. And it doesn't just affect the individual, it affects their marriage, their family, and the way they can even walk in their calling in God. When you are walking in a choice, a poor substitute to meet a deep core need, you can't live in your purpose. There is just a constant drain there. You're not able to live in the overflow, whether it's porn or any other addiction or lifestyle choice that is not God's best. Then it just interferes. So some people are really motivated by living in their purpose, and this would be a reason to go forward because there's so much more joy and life and giving that you can experience on the other side of your healing.
That's so true. Okay, so let me ask this. I know when I've walked with some girlfriends through the struggle of their husbands being addicted to porn, from my perspective, that feels like adultery.
Yes.
From where the woman is standing, it's adultery because their heart and their mind and their eyes are set on another woman. Their hands and body may not be there, but then again, maybe they are in some ways. You know what I mean? And so
yes.
Well, I mean, your marriage ended in divorce. And so I even want to ask, like, is that grounds for divorce and why? Because we don't see that necessarily listed in scripture as one of the reasons for divorce. But I have come to learn there are reasons for divorce that aren't necessarily listed in scripture, like abuse, and things like that. And so how did you navigate even that territory? Because again, it was hard for you to find resources or voices of help. And so how did you navigate that line of where are the lines? At what point does this end my marriage? Because obviously it's not healthy for me and it's not healthy for him and it's not helping us.
Right. Well, I wish I had the tools then that I do now. So I would have made decisions in a completely different way. But I did have an older female cousin that I could talk to that helped me a lot. And she is a believer, but not as active in the same way that I am. And in some ways, that was an easier person to talk to because I was not being hit over the head with what the Bible said. And I love the Bible, but when the scriptures just pulled out of context and hit you over the head with it, then that doesn't feel like God's love. And I just recently heard a message that Jesus didn't go to the cross for marriages. He went to the cross for the individual. So we don't put the marriage above the individual. You don't stay married to the point of detriment and harm, and just because marriage is even more important than who you are. No, Jesus went to the cross. He died for the individual to know that freedom and that whole life. And we want that for everyone, but it is each person's unique choice if they are going to choose that or not. And it's to make a decision to have separation at first, because if you're living in that situation, it's very difficult. Maybe one stage is move out of the bedroom, sleep on the couch. But if you're in that situation, that environment, that marriage household where these lies are just being twisted every day, then it's really difficult to have a boundary. So a physical separation helps. I would certainly encourage people to get the support that they need so that they're not walking through it alone, because it is emotional and you don't want to make decisions based on your emotions. Different states have legal descriptions on what is the process is for, some states recognize a legal separation, some states do not. So there's a lot of area to consider to get your support and to figure out what your next step is, but knowing that Jesus is there for you, whether you stay or whether you leave. Jesus is there for you, whether your spouse changes or they don't change. Jesus is there for you as you are recreating your life and just becoming more transformed to the image of his son. So that place of joy is something that you are identified by.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've seen and witnessed as a woman with friends and as a pastor overseeing people, I've experienced that a lot of times women, which is probably good at its core, women are slow to draw a line when things are really unhealthy in the marriage and say, I'm not putting up with this. In some regards, that's probably good because, love perseveres, love hopes all things, believes all. I mean, like there is a perseverance that's necessary to walking in faith and walking in love. And I think that's what makes it feel like such a gray area, when to draw lines and how to draw lines, because a lot of women are like, but if I separate, then I'm not in faith anymore, believing for him to be changed. And I'm like, that's not exactly true, because I can pray for him and I can believe God's going to change his life, but that doesn't mean I have to continue to subject myself to treatment that is unhealthy, because Proverbs says I have a responsibility to guard my own heart above all else, right? And so I do have a responsibility to the health of my heart and the health of my mind. And as I do share with women, that there were times in my own marriage where it wasn't until I drew firm lines that cost him to protect, in order to protect myself, it began to put the pain of his actions back on him, that he was like, oh, I need to change. And that's the value of boundaries, is that when you do draw a boundary and say, if you treat me this way, this is how I'm going to respond. And it leaves you powerful in your life rather than a victim in your life. Sure. And it causes the pain of their actions to sit on their shoulders instead of yours. And that is a way that we can protect righteousness in our lives, because now when they feel the pain of their actions, suddenly they're motivated to do something about it. But as long as you're the one carrying all the pain of their actions, they're not motivated. They're getting the good life. They get their sin and they get you, which I don't know if you call that the good life, but for them, it's convenient, And so what would you say to that for women who are, I don't know where to draw a line. I don't know what that looks like. He says he wants to change. He says he is changing, but how do I know? How do I know? Like, I feel like there's just a lot of confusion around that for women.
You can see fruit. If there's change, there's fruit. You can have parameters on needing to see fruit.
Yeah.
It's not an indefinite, you can change whenever you want to change. I'll be here always. It doesn't matter. That is sowing more disrespect into the relationship. If you live with no signs of change, then you are disrespecting yourself. And boundaries are never about punishment. Boundaries are always with the belief that it's going to be the best thing for both people. It's not an ultimatum. It's not a threat, but you can't have a marriage without respect. And we get used to low levels of respect. If that's been all we've experienced, even from childhood, it feels normal. I know in my situation, I was divorced 5 years before I remarried. And I dated a lot because I didn't really know what it felt like to be respected in a relationship. And once I began to sense, oh, this feels good. Respect is amazing. Yeah. And I needed to set the bar at a different place for myself than I had in the past. And then I began to attract other men as I was dating who they would only want to be with me if they had a similar bar for respect. So that's important. And it can start in very small ways. If there is disrespect in the household, a quick one-liner is to always say, it feels like there's disrespect. I'm going to leave the room now, but I'd love to talk about it later.
Yeah.
And then you exit. Because fighting over you always or you never is equally respectful. You can only make decisions for yourself. You are only responsible for your own behavior. So we don't have success when we tell somebody else what they're doing or not doing. We have success when we learn how to manage ourselves.
That's so good. That's so good. Okay. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, which I also want to be clear, because some of our listeners are people that go to our church. But the lines I drew in my marriage, my husband has talked about it from the pulpit, was his anger, not porn, thank goodness. But they each bring their own struggles. And they each bring their own turmoil. So that was what our deal was. But a lot of the same parallels, I feel like. It's still broken trust. It's still, how do I protect safety? How do I protect healthy? How do I cultivate an environment of respect? Because that's what it came down to. And so same thing. So now for anyone who's listening that you're like, oh, I want you to keep going in this direction, you probably just need to connect with Mary, because I feel like we probably could talk about this aspect of this for a while. But I want to pivot a little bit towards healthy intimacy, because you were passionate about just healthy intimacy in a marriage. What does that look like? And how does someone know when intimacy in their marriage is healthy? And what are some signs that it might not be healthy?
Oh, it's very interesting. Sometimes when I go speak to groups, my opening line is your sex life saved?
That's a good line.
Yeah, people they're stumped by that a bit. And the message is, if you only model your sex life after what you've seen in the world, whether it is extreme negative hookup culture, or whether it's even just Hallmark style that is very realistic, if you're modeling your sex life and marriage after that, then that's not what God says.
Yeah.
So there is a fulfilling and beautiful aspect the way God describes it. And I use an acronym to help couples understand what is healthy. And it's the word gift, because I do believe that God designed sexual intimacy as a gift to marriage. So the G stands for good. And because the church has shamed things in the past, we don't even understand how good it is. And I'm not just talking about however many seconds of pleasure that happens. No, the good it's a spirit, soul, and body type of goodness. The I stands for intimate. And we as a culture are very hesitant to trust each other, but without trust, there's no true intimacy.
Yeah.
So sexual intimacy includes that. The F stands for fierce, which might be an unusual word when you're thinking about sex, but the bond that happens when couples are regularly experiencing healthy sexual intimacy, that bond unites them, it makes them strong, and then their union, they're able to withstand so many of the trials on this everyday life. And then the last one is T, and it's for timeless. And the timeless aspect has two ends of the spectrum. It's like this childlike wonder and play within sexual intimacy with your spouse. And then on the other end of the spectrum, timelessness means, hey, as you age, you adapt to one another and you mature. You can just work together through whatever you need to. So sexual intimacy is just such a blessing that overflows and grows. And when it's happening in your marriage, then there's just these wonderful ripples that bless everything.
That's so good. Okay, so I want to pull in a thought. I was at a Christian marriage conference weekend thing, and there was a specific pastor who really likes to cover the sex topic, right? We'll just leave it at that. And but he spent the whole session, and he was in a mixed group. So I was actually very uncomfortable the whole time because he was very explicit. As he's reading through parts of Song of Solomon, he's like, do you know what this means? Here's what it means in real life. And he which is great. We need to know these things. But can we just split the group so it's not men and women in the same room having anyways. But the thing that made me actually angry is he put all of his energy reading through Song of Solomon and focusing on the sexual behaviors that are described there, but he missed the precursor, which was, she said, I feel safe in my lover's shadow. And then it went into the sexual behaviors. And I was like, he missed the whole key that would have preached the whole sermon about how to have better sex, which is she feels safe. And so speak to what is safety. And I think that brings in that respect element. And how do couples cultivate that? Clearly important. It's right there in Song of Solomon. And as a woman, and our sexuality is unlocked emotionally, that safety is even more important. So can you speak to that?
Yes. The safety is a concept that not everybody understands. They're like, well, I'm safe. He's not hitting me. I'm like, oh, no. It's so much more than that. We want this emotional space where you can share personal things and realize that you're not going to be ridiculed, you're not going to be corrected, you're not going to be judged. You can have the real me show up, and you extend that to your spouse. Being safe means that there is respect, there's place for growth. You can call out and believe the best in your spouse. But when that connection is there, that value is there, then that security provides a place for couples to take more risk within their sex life. Mm-hmm. Because when I get asked sometimes at marriage retreats, the anonymous questions that come, and they are, what's okay for Christians, married Christians in sex? And they're sort of pushing the envelope to the other extreme. And my short answer is, as long as it is mutually satisfying and respectful and follows the guidelines of Scripture, mm-hmm. there are all kinds of yeses there as your answer, instead of more or no's than people might have thought. But you can only go to the areas of trying new things when the safety is there, when the trust, the respect, the security is in the marriage. And I'll add this one other thing. When couples are early in their dating, in their married life, and they live off of spontaneity, mm-hmm. and everything just has a flow and a go, and doesn't seem to be hesitation. And when they get into these patterns, just taking on more responsibility, they find out they're needing to on things in their marriage. They probably should have started the work from day one, mm-hmm. and not waited until they needed it. But the learning how to create safety can be a skill that is acquired, but certainly is very, very doable and worth all the effort to get to that place.
And I think creating safety, another way that shows up is like when a couple finds that one wants to have intimacy and the other doesn't, mm-hmm. how does the person who wants to respond to the person who doesn't, right? And so I think oftentimes it's usually the man is ready, the woman is like, I have a headache, I'm not in the mood or whatever. But I know that like in our relationship, when he would respond negatively or angrily or harshly or in like have a fit, or whatever, when I wasn't in the mood, then it left me in the place of feeling unsafe, to be honest, sure. Unsafe to say, I just really don't want to right now, or I don't feel like there's been enough connection emotionally to feel like I can do that with you right now, but I didn't have that safety. So he had to work on that and create that safety and get healthy enough in himself that he wasn't so codependent that he had to have sex or else, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so, because I think safety shows up outside the bedroom just as much as it shows up inside, would you say?
Absolutely. And there's the expression that sex starts in the kitchen. It just means it's an all day, every aspect of life. Men are compartmentalized, and so they might be able to engage in sex without all of the emotional connection beforehand. But women function very differently, and they need the safety, the respect, the love, the flirting, the fun. Otherwise, they feel judged, critiqued, and I don't want to do it because I never do it like you want me to do it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's talk about this. You and I discussed kind of briefly beforehand, and I bring this up because I think a lot of women will relate to this. Is it common for women to deal with no sex drive or limited sex drive how does she navigate that? Because I think for women, because our sexuality is so emotionally motivated, when you also hormonally don't have any motivation, then it can kind of feel almost like the two cross over. And it's like, I feel like sex can quickly, for a woman anyways, become where it feels a little violating or a little, that's maybe a strong word, but demeaning, maybe not, I don't know, I'm struggling to find the right word, but where it just doesn't feel good and wholesome quickly if there's not enough of the right elements in place. And I think when you don't have a healthy sex drive, then it can be very hard to know how to navigate when it's okay to say no, and do I just need to just do it even though I don't feel like it? Is that love? How does a woman navigate that? Because that's just a very real thing.
It's so common. That's probably, I don't know, 75% of why I see couples, because they have desires, different frequency, different everything and trying to make sense of that. And so many ways I could answer that. I'll make a couple of points. Women have to give their mental yes before they can give their body over to respond. And why can't she give her mental yes? All the cares of the day that she has to suspend. I mean, it's temporary. If you can temporarily forget that, oh, I've got to do laundry, oh, my child's got this project, oh, what about this thing that's coming up in the weekend? All of the things that are going on in her thoughts. If she can temporarily suspend those, then she is more able to give herself to sexual intimacy. So that is a part of the process. Also, teach foreplay, and I say that it's words and actions, and that she needs words of appreciation, affirmation, and affection. So good. Those are all things to learn, but they are necessary for her whole person, her whole body to participate. And then even the types of action, the touch that happens, there is a learning curve with that, because there is indirect stimulation before there's direct. There's a soft touch before there's a heavier touch. Slower touches before there's fast touch. So couples, when they can understand that about each other, that helps. Yeah. And one last thought about women and libido, that she may have hesitation on the front end, but when she is excited, she might have an amazing experience. It's just that little bridge to get to that place. And we have to find out what is her way, their way, to get over that bridge. And I've used the example of like when a couple's going to go out to dinner and he says, "Where do you want to go?" And she's like, "I don't know." "Well, do you want to go Italian, Mexican?" "Oh, it doesn't matter. You pick it." And they get to the restaurant. "What do you want to eat?" "Oh, it doesn't matter to me. What are you going to get to eat?" So much indecision. And then finally, a wait staff appears in the room. They have a tray full of food. There is a fajita on that tray. You can hear it sizzle. You can smell it. You can see it as it's being carried through the room. And she's like, "I want a fajita. I want it now." So she's building because the whole has been set for that moment. And each couple needs to figure out, how do we build to get to this place where we are both ready to give ourselves freely to one another.
So what you just described, I can relate to, but I also feel like sounds, especially to the guy who's ready in a moment, like that's a lot of work. Is it even worth the work? Because I feel like a lot of, from people, I'm thinking through conversations I've had with girlfriends and sisters and cousins and all the people and the different ways that their men respond to them. And it's so common for women to experience that their husband's not even willing to do the work to put her in a good space. He just wants to make the demand and her just satisfy a demand. And so what does the woman do with that? Like, that's frustrating, right? But it's like, you can't make him do the work. What does she do with that?
That is a marriage issue and not a sex issue.
Good point. I love that. You just said that. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, because it's an unwillingness for him to cultivate real intimacy and connection.
And potentially an unwillingness on her part to be that vulnerable.
Oh.
Because she is giving spirit, soul, and body. It is complete transparency. I mean, in essence, he is also, but just the way they process it, he can sort of, as I said, compartmentalize. He's may have not made the connection. This is my whole person being given to you. But that's the only way that she can experience it if it's true intimacy. If it is a physical act only, then you are creating disconnect. Yeah. And if that is the pattern, physical acts only, then you're doomed. You are selling your soul, even if you're married, even if you're Christian. That is not the way that God designed sexual intimacy.
I love that you just said that. Thank you for saying that, because as a Christian, you don't hear that enough, because I have so many girlfriends who've said when they've had sexual struggles, or even their husband's looking at porn, or their husband has been unfaithful, or he's emotionally abusive or whatever, the church will say, well, you just need to give him more sex and put it on her. And like, she's supposed to just somehow come up with this thing to meet this carnal need when they're missing the whole point that it's an emotional experience in their marriage that's not happening. And so I love that you just said that. Another thought was, what about when women have experienced, and I'm sure we all have probably experienced this, and bless it, our husbands are trying, where the husband maybe it's in the afternoon or the evening, and suddenly he'll start doing sweet things, or he'll smile, or he'll pay a little compliment. And it's almost like you can anticipate, like, okay, he's trying to turn on the engines because I know where he's headed. He wants some sex tonight. What do you do when that pattern begins to teach the woman, or how can the woman fight against the belief that like, oh, I'm just a means to an end, like, or these kind actions aren't genuine. He's just trying to get what he wants later. I mean, because you can hear the unhealthiness in that thinking.
Sure.
But that's just a very real experience, at least for people I've experienced that I've talked to, and then myself as well, okay, it doesn't feel genuine because it's not happening early in the morning, or it's not happening on a day when sex isn't, like, we won't even be together in the evening. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you navigate that? Or what would you tell a couple that's dealing with, or a woman who's dealing with that pattern?
Is sex for men only?
Well, they're much more motivated, I think.
I think the belief system has to be changed. Women think sex is only for my husband, or mostly for my husband, or always about my husband. Then there's a missing piece of information. God designed it to be, and I hate to use the word beautiful because it gets overused, but when a woman feels confident in her sexuality, when she enjoys not just the physical, but the emotional satisfaction of that oneness, then it's something that she will desire. And she may not be desiring it for the physical release. But knowing that if I, as a woman, learn to desire intimacy, it is so good and healthy and strong for me, for my marriage, for my children, for everything. It's learning why. It's the motivation for sexual intimacy. If it's pleasure only, then there are lots of struggles, and lots of struggles that they don't have to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. So, okay, let's pan back and look big picture. What is the value of having a healthy sexual relationship? Like, more than just you feel connected. You know what I mean? Like, what's the big picture value? You mentioned it's good for your kids. It has a ripple effect of impact.
Oh, yes.
So what's the value of a healthy sexual relationship, and what's the detriment of not cultivating and working on this side of a marriage?
Right. The value, as an individual, your frame for life is different. You know that you are cherished, wanted, desired, known, and that you get to give also to your spouse. It makes you more united. You feel like you're a team, so you can face things because there's a strength. There's a security there. We are together. We are one. We are not at odds. My spouse is not my enemy. With that comes security for the family. Your kids are at a better place because mom and dad are at a better place, and you can give to the community. You can live in your purpose. Just many, many, sometimes unseen benefits, but still so powerful. And if you are not at that place, then it's working against you on every level. You are being distracted by temptations out there because you have a need. And I mean, the need that God made each one of us to be known, to be seen, to be loved, to be understood, it's a wonderful need. And it's up to us to know how we are meeting that need. So if it's not being met in your relationship with God, in your relationship with your spouse through sexual intimacy, you will look for other things. And it may be good things. I mean, there have been so many marriages that have been affected by an overactive church life.
Yep.
And they think that they are being godly because they're doing godly things. But if their priorities are off, then that's going to interfere. It's a whole belief system shift. What is really good? That's why I say that what's going on in the world is a counterfeit, but God's original design is not known, is not practiced, is valued and celebrated. And so people are missing out on some of these tools to make marriage be amazing.
Yeah, that's so good. So now how about for women? You and I mentioned earlier that our hormones change. I was telling one of my boys this the other day because I started my period, and he was like, I was just in pain. And he was like, Mom, how often do you go through this? And I said, every month. And he goes, does it last a day or does it last a week? So he had all these questions around it, you know, and, but I'm like, you're going to have a wife. You might have daughters. It's good that you know these things. But anyways, he had so much compassion. He was like, you deal with this for a whole week every month. And I think he added it up. He goes, that means at the end of your life, you've spent 30 years on your period. He's like calculating it. He's like, that's a lot of pain. So what do women do? Like, obviously our periods cycle monthly, but our hormones actually change weekly, and they actually change with the moon and the sun. So like women's hormones are like a freaking roller coaster, and it's so frustrating just to keep things in balance. And so what do women do when their hormones are a struggle and it's impacting their sexual life? Like, what do they do with that? How can they cultivate a healthy sexual life when their hormones are not helping, not participating?
Sure. Well, I think that we forget about our faith walk in our sex life. So God made us. None of these things are a surprise to him. And he is, and I don't mean to say this as a pat answer, but truly prayer, God, I want to walk in the fullness of everything that you have for me. Give me wisdom, how to manage my body, how to take care of my body, how to take care of my thoughts. I mean, just pressing in, and God, I want the very best for my marriage and my interaction. Help me to understand what that is. Bring the right people across my path for me to learn new things. And there's so many different supplements and exercise. I mean, the ways to manage your health are growing every day as far as new types of things that will support you with that. So you can be mad, frustrated, aggravated, take it out on everybody, or find a way that works for you, that you are having some breakthrough and some success. If you use hormones as a reason to not be nice. Ooh, I almost thought of a word there.
Oh,
if you use hormones as a reason to take it out on other people, then we are missing how we need to go through this.
And we're missing godliness. I tell my boys when they've been going through puberty, I'm like, listen, boys, I understand hormones making you into a different person. I do. And I'm like, but guess what? It is nobody else's fault that you're in puberty. Nobody else gets to be your punching bag. It's your job to manage yourself, even when you're going through hormones. I said, I can speak to that because I have to deal with this monthly. Yeah. And so I'm like, but it's not fair for me to just freak out on you because I'm having a hormonal thing, right? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, same for us. And so I hate when I see parents like let their teenagers be monsters just because they're having hormonal changes. I'm like, I'm sorry, you still have to teach them like boundaries and healthy self-management, right? But speaking of kids, how do we talk to our kids about this topic? And we talked about this just a little bit. And I mentioned to you that for us in our house, like the Lord had it on my heart, a couple of core things were important. One, that we be the first voice that they hear on this topic, because
that's good.
Because the law of first, right? If I'm the first voice they hear, then that lays the foundation that they weigh everything else against. And so being the first voice on this topic. So the Lord actually was putting it on our heart to talk about sex with our first son when he was only 6 years old. And that didn't mean I just sat down and like laid it all out, but I started paying attention. Is he asking questions? Is there stuff that's in cartoons I'm not aware of? You know, I just started paying close attention, and I just started asking the Lord, like, would you help us to recognize when to take the opportunity to discuss these things? So we began to pretty much, when they are old enough to ask questions, we will take them seriously and we will answer their questions age appropriately, and do it in a way that, and parents have to be really careful of this, that we don't, with our response, embed shame into those questions, because it's very easy. Like, I remember one time my son was like 8 and we were doing dishes in the kitchen, and out of nowhere he goes, Mom, what is rape? And I was like, it was such a
Oh,
startling question. I didn't actually react like that, but inside I felt that. But I was like, keep your
yes.
chill face, keep your poker face, girl, keep your poker face. And so I was like, well, that's a good question, buddy. And so it created an opportunity for me to kindly and gently explain something and realizing I get to frame the way he thinks about this because I get to be the first voice. And so being the first voice was very important. Secondly, was when they're asking questions, answer them age appropriately. And the third one was making sure that they know, do not be ashamed to ask questions about this. I worked very hard to try to cultivate an environment that felt light and good around these questions and not shameful, because the church has done a really bad job embedding shame into this topic. And so I would explain to my boys, like, this isn't something to be ashamed of. It's just a personal, private matter. And so we can discuss it amongst ourselves, but it's not something to discuss with your friends because their parents want to be the ones to have those conversations with them. And so we were able to kind of lay some little boundaries with that. But what have you seen to a healthy way to approach discussing this with kids? How early do kids need to hear about this? And just kind of dive into that, because our culture has really changed this up a lot.
Right. All right. There's some things that we need to keep in mind in regards to timing to talk about sex with children and just sort of a framework. So I would, one thing I loved is even with young children, even diaper changing time, to be able to call out their sexual identity, calling out who they are. God made you a little boy. God made you a little girl. This is wonderful. They're not understanding everything, but two things are happening. You are sowing seed in them on how good and godly this is. Also, you're making it very natural and comfortable to say those things out loud. Now, it could be that we're well past diaper changing, but parents feel that it's very awkward. So I encourage parents to say things in the mirror first by themselves. Practice out loud what you would want to say. Now, I know that those spontaneous questions come up and you want to be ready for those, and you can't necessarily practice first, but even just finding out what language do you want to use with your children when you're labeling things so that you are ready for that. And then one other thought, I've heard this recently and I'm like, oh, I totally agree with this, to know about our heads, our hearts, and our parts. What are we protecting? What are we covering? What are we honoring? So in your head, it's your thought life, and it's your heart. That would be more of how you respect and honor. And then parts, of course, is your physical being and sexual ways of acting. So letting kids know that you get to manage you. And it's exciting. It's a big job, but God would not have asked you to manage you if he didn't think you were able. And as a parent, I'll help you as much as you need to talk these things out, but it is your lifelong journey.
Yeah.
You know, single and married, to manage your sexuality, to have that integrity. And the way that we can sow this as little things to begin with, just to make it as natural as you can. And you kept saying age appropriate. So I certainly agree with that.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different things, from the impact of porn on marriage and how women can draw boundaries and what to do with our hormones and how to keep it healthy in the bedroom. And what do you feel like ultimately, and I'll wrap with this question and then we'll invite people to connect with you. What do you feel like, if you were to summarize God's heart behind a sexual relationship in a marriage, how would you summarize that? Is there like an illustration you paint for people, or how would you summarize that?
Christmas morning. It's the excitement, the anticipation, the joy. Sometimes it's more about the intention behind the gift than the actual gift. I actually, as a child, my family had moved. We were in a new city. It was Christmas. I go downstairs and I'm looking at the tree and there's presents underneath. And I see a strange thing under the Christmas tree. It's a pipe with a bow and my name, and then this ribbon that goes across the floor and down the stairs and into the garage to another box, which had a swing set in it. And my parents had surprised me with a swing set for Christmas. But to this day, I think I was more excited about the anticipation of the gift and the fun of opening it, even versus the gift. So God designs sexual intimacy in marriage to be a gift, to be enjoyed and celebrated and have anticipation over and find new ways to use it. So we just need to wrap it with all the goodness that God had planned for it, and to be happily challenged by the mystery that's included in sexual intimacy, and to know that we always want to be learning more about it.
That's so good. That's so good. And I want to encourage, especially any men who might be listening, especially when you have boys or girls, actually, I think it's really important that men really set the pace through their example. One thing that I appreciated about my husband was, even from when the boys were very little, like 18 months, 2 years old enough to watch TV, if there would be a commercial or anything that would come across on the screen where girls were dressed in a way that were like, you don't need to look at that, my husband would teach the boys, look away, boys. It's rude to look at a girl who's not dressed properly. It's rude. And so he taught them from a very young age to look away. We walk by Victoria's Secret, they look at the floor. If girls are not dressed appropriately, we're at the beach and their butts are hanging out, or whatever, the boys just look the other direction. And it's been programmed into them by both their daddy's example, which I always feel honored as a woman. And I've had these conversations with my boys, especially if they weren't looking away, and stuff like that. I would sit down and have very honest conversations with them as a woman and say, here's how it makes me feel as a woman when the men around me who I love and trust to protect me and who I also want to protect, if you look at women like that, here's how it makes me feel as a woman. It makes me feel betrayed. It makes me feel that you're not being the safe man I need you to be, because in my heart, I need you to look away from those things, because that tells me you recognize that women are to be respected and to be protected. And so having those honest, vulnerable conversations, even with my boys, I think has given them so much context for respecting women differently and treating women differently than culture has taught them, because I have noticed immediate results after we have those conversations. They immediately change their behavior, and it has been so fruitful. But I do feel like the ground was laid for that also by my husband demonstrating that, and then by me being able to bring my voice as a woman to the topic to give them a healthier idea, because I definitely didn't want to be like, shame on you, you should not, rah. I don't want to beat them over the head with shame. I want to help them understand the heart, because I want them to rise up into that role of a protector, a provider, a safe man. And I think in our culture now, we'll show them like, hey, when you see this stuff happening on TV, when you see stuff happening at the Olympics, when you see these different things happening, or women being assaulted and kids being sex trafficked and all of this, or like my son just went on a mission trip and they went to the red light district. And when they all came back from it, there was a number of young boys on that trip, which I was kind of like, why'd you take them to the red light district? But when they came back, they had a very good conversation about the dangers of pornography. And it was very marking for my boy. And I was able to ask him, like, how did that make you feel seeing women treated like that? How did it make you feel as a man? And your job is to protect. And so really trying to make the most of those conversations and remind them of the goodness that's inside of them by God, that their strength is to protect and not to harm. And anyway, that's something that I feel like for the men that are listening, don't underestimate how much it speaks to the women around you, to your children, to even the men around you, about your respect and about people's value when you make the choice to take the high road and look away, or choose to treat women with honor. It affects far more than just yourself. It is not just an isolated decision. It affects the people around you dramatically. So Mary, if people wanted to connect with you and wanted to maybe get some help in their marriage or find out about your resources, you mentioned to me that you've got a free app with lots of resources on it, with videos. Your ministry is called Limitless Intimacy. Where would we direct people to connect with you?
Absolutely. So the app, of course, can be downloaded. It's also called Limitless Intimacy. And then all of my socials are under my name, Mary Whitman Ortiz. So website, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. They can find new information there. And we'd just love to walk with people as they are finding all of the healthy blessings that God has waiting for them.
That's so good. And I just want to say, I appreciate that you're a pioneer in many ways, in that there are not many Christian voices on this topic. More and more there are, and I'm grateful for that because it's necessary. It's just a part of life we all deal with. And so, my goodness, we need Christian voices on this topic. So thank you for walking the path that you did and for leaning into healing aggressively, because I know that was not an easy journey. People get to eat the fruit of that now. And so thank you for the path that you have walked.
Amen.
Amen. Well, you guys, thanks so much for listening. This was just a really, honestly, this was a refreshing topic to talk about, especially in light of what's going on in our culture. The last number of years, we have just seen an attack on sexuality and sexual identity and the beauty of intimacy. And so it's really important that we are speaking to the beauty of this topic and the purpose of this topic and taking back the narrative around this topic. We are not going to let the loudest voice steal this, or rather we are going to be the loudest voice on this topic. We need to be as believers. And so share this episode with some friends, share it with your mom friends, your wife friends, share it with some men to motivate them in their journey to be examples to their boys, whatever it may be. Share it with some friends. It's a really valuable topic. Connect with Mary. If you just want to go deeper in this area, you would just like some refreshing Christian-based tools around this topic, make sure check out her app called Limitless Intimacy. Check out her videos and resources. Connect with her online. And you guys, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store, where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.